A fight in jail, a secret phone call, and now a deal that could change YNW Melly's life forever. But is his closest friend about to turn against him? One night, two friends lost their lives, and now the man who was inside that car is ready to reveal everything. The question is, will Melly survive this? The families want justice. The fans want loyalty. But everything now depends on one witness. If he talks, Melly's life could be over. Police found no shell casings, no broken glass, no sign of a drive-by. So, what really happened inside that Jeep? In February 2020, YNW Melly found himself in trouble after being caught in a fight inside his unit's dayroom. He received a disciplinary report for his role in it. Later that year, in October, he was punished again, this time with a room restriction after refusing to return to his cell while trying to stay hidden on the phone. Fast forward to now, and a new push has begun to get the rapper released from jail. He's currently waiting for a retrial over the deaths of two close friends, but his legal team has filed a lawsuit claiming he's being kept in inhumane conditions. In a recent hearing, the judge even set a potential bond release date, partly triggered by a major development. YNW Bortlin, Melly's co-defendant, accepted a plea deal. Bortlin's decision to accept a plea deal marked one of the most dramatic turns in the case against YNW Melly. This agreement wasn't just about reducing his sentence, it was about telling the truth. By signing a proffer, Bortlin essentially promised to cooperate with investigators and reveal what he knew. In exchange, he pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact, a charge that carried serious weight but came with a reduced penalty compared to the original accusations against him. His sentence was set at 10 years in prison, followed by 6 years of probation. On paper, the deal gave him a chance to eventually regain his freedom. But the real cost wasn't measured in years, it was measured in loyalty and survival. By agreeing to talk, Bortlin positioned himself against the very people he once called family. For prosecutors, the deal was a breakthrough. They had long believed that Bortlin held key information about what happened in the Jeep that night, the night two of his closest friends were killed. His account could confirm or dismantle the defense's entire story. That's why, almost immediately after the plea, prosecutors pushed for his deposition in a related civil case. They weren't just eager to get his statement on record, they were worried about his safety. The concern was clear. Prison is a dangerous place for someone labeled a snitch. Word spreads quickly, and those who cooperate with authorities often become targets. Prosecutors feared that something could happen to Bortlin behind bars before he ever got the chance to testify in court. To them, his voice wasn't just valuable, it was irreplaceable. The idea of testifying put Bortlin in an impossible position. On one hand, he could finally tell the truth and ease some of the weight he had carried for years. On the other, every word he spoke could make him a marked man, not just in prison, but outside of it too. Cooperating against someone as high-profile as Melly was never going to be safe. Behind the scenes, conversations about witness protection and safety protocols began to circulate. Prosecutors knew that if Bortlin was going to hold up his end of the deal, he needed to feel confident he wouldn't pay with his life for doing so. Still, the reality was harsh. There's only so much the system can do once someone is already behind bars. For Melly, the news of Bortlin's cooperation was devastating. Up until then, his legal team had argued that the state's case was built on shaky ground, circumstantial evidence, theories, and speculation. But a cooperating co-defendant changes everything. If Bortlin really told the truth about what happened that night, it could provide jurors with the missing piece of the puzzle, the kind of first-hand account that no forensic evidence could fully replace. It's not just about what Bortlin knows, but how he presents it. Jurors often weigh credibility as heavily as facts. If he appears remorseful, consistent, and believable, his words could tip the scales dramatically against Melly. And prosecutors know it. That's why they're determined to protect him long enough to get his full statement on record. The civil case tied to the murders only raised the stakes further. Families of the victims wanted justice beyond the criminal trial, seeking answers and accountability through the courts. Bortlin's deposition could influence not only Melly's fate, but also the financial and emotional closure that the families had been chasing for years. His testimony, then, wasn't just about one trial. It could ripple across multiple legal battles connected to the tragedy. From a broader perspective, Bortlin's proffer shines a light on how prosecutors use leverage in complex cases. When evidence is limited or disputed, securing cooperation from an insider can be the difference between conviction and acquittal. But that strategy comes with risks, mainly the danger that the witness may recant, go silent, or worse, never make it to the stand. And that's why this moment feels so pivotal. With every day that passes, pressure mounts on both sides. For the state, the challenge is keeping Bortlen safe and ensuring his story holds up under scrutiny. For the defense, the challenge is discrediting him before his words can do irreparable damage to Melly's case. Outside the courtroom, fans and observers continue to debate what this all means. Some see Bortlen's cooperation as a betrayal, proof that he broke under pressure. Others argue it shows courage, that he's finally choosing the truth over loyalty to a street code that often leaves more people dead or imprisoned. Regardless of how the public interprets it, one fact remains: his testimony could change everything. For Melly, whose freedom hangs in the balance, the words of a former friend may be the single most powerful weapon the prosecution has. For the victims' families, it may be the closest they get to understanding what really happened on the night their loved ones never came home. And for Bortlen himself, it marks the beginning of a long, uncertain road, one where survival, redemption, and justice collide in ways that may haunt him for the rest of his life. In the end, the proffer was more than a piece of paper. It was a turning point. By signing it, Bortlen didn't just accept a sentence, he accepted a role in unraveling the truth. Whether that truth will ultimately free Melly or seal his fate is a question only time and Bortlen's testimony can answer. Not long after cutting his deal, Bortlen made sure the public knew he wasn't folding under the pressure. Speaking out from jail, he delivered a defiant message, brushing off the speculation surrounding his cooperation. To him, the chatter was just noise. He insisted he wouldn't be broken by critics or rumors. Still, no matter what he said from behind bars, the court's decision stood firm. YNW Melly's retrial was locked in for January 2027. The timeline was clear, but what wasn't certain was whether Melly would be granted bond before the retrial began. That decision, prosecutors hinted, would depend heavily on Bortlen's testimony. If his statements directly supported the state's theory, Melly's chances of temporary release would shrink even further. Commentators wasted no time analyzing the impact of Bortlen's plea. One of the most vocal was DJ Academics, who broke it down for his audience in plain terms. By entering a plea of no contest, Bortlen wasn't just accepting punishment, he was also legally required to provide a factual account of his actions. That meant explaining how he helped cover up the murders, step by step, and in doing so, essentially confirming that the killings took place as prosecutors described. To be clear, Bortlen's words didn't amount to a direct statement that Melly pulled the trigger, but they painted a more complete picture of what happened after the shots were fired. Prosecutors could now argue that if Bortlen admitted to covering up the crime itself must have happened. That's the kind of gap in the narrative the state had been trying to fill since the beginning. For many observers, this strategy felt familiar. They compared it to what fans often call a Ghana plea. In that situation, a defendant doesn't just admit guilt in a vague sense, they also have to provide a detailed explanation of their role, which inevitably adds credibility to the broader case. It's not just saying, yes, I was involved. It's laying out the how, when, and why in a way that prosecutors can later use as supporting evidence. That comparison is exactly why Bortlen's deal struck such a nerve. To supporters of Melly, it felt like betrayal. They argued that even if Bortlen never outright said Melly was guilty, the very act of acknowledging the cover-up gave prosecutors ammunition. Every detail he admitted to filled in cracks the defense had been exploiting, making it harder for Melly's lawyers to poke holes in the state's timeline. But from another perspective, Bortlen's decision was almost inevitable. Facing the possibility of a harsher sentence, his options were limited. 10 years in prison with probation afterward might be the kind of outcome most defendants would take, especially compared to the alternative of risking decades, or even life, behind bars. For him, the proffer wasn't just a deal. It was survival. Meanwhile, Melly's future hung in the balance. The retrial date gave prosecutors more time to prepare, and Bortlen's cooperation offered them a new layer of confidence. At the same time, the defense now had to anticipate how to counter a narrative that was no longer just circumstantial evidence and theory. It included testimony from someone who was there that night, someone who admitted his role in what happened after. The months leading up to January 2027 promised to be critical. Would Bortlen stand by his defiance, or would he expand on the story in ways that left Melly cornered? Would the defense manage to discredit him as a man who cut a deal just to save himself? Or would the jury see him as the missing puzzle piece in a case that had dragged on for years? No matter how it unfolds, one thing is certain. With Bortlen's plea, the stakes of Melly's retrial have reached a new height. His defiant words from jail may have been meant to project strength, but in the courtroom, his testimony could become the deciding factor in whether Melly walks free or spends the rest of his life behind bars. The plea deal shocked many, including the judge, who noted how surprisingly light the sentence was considering Bortlen faced the possibility of multiple life terms. By accepting it, he cut down what could have been 5 life sentences to just a little more than 6 years left to serve. High-profile attorney Bradford Cohen even suggested Bortlen took the cheese, hinting he might eventually flip on Melly. For prosecutors, Bortlen's role is crucial. If he admits that Sack Chaser and Juvie were killed inside the car, that leaves Melly as the only possible shooter. During questioning years earlier, when asked if he knew who committed the crime, Bortlen avoided giving a clear yes or no, which officers read as hesitation. That uncertainty may now be replaced by hard details in his testimony. Adding to the evidence, prosecutors claim Melly himself confessed just hours after the killings in private messages, where he wrote, "I did that," followed by a smiley face emoji. Even with this weight against him, Melly's family remains hopeful. His brother recently revealed that despite being locked up, Melly has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, not just on lawyers, but also on jewelry and cars he can't even use while in prison. To his family, this spending shows confidence that he'll eventually walk free. But as it stands, his fate rests on 3 things: the conditions of his bond, what Bortlen is willing to reveal, and how much weight the court gives to Melly's past words and actions. For now, one truth is clear: every move Bortlen makes from here on out could decide whether Melly regains his freedom or spends the rest of his life behind bars. Melly's choices while behind bars have raised eyebrows, even among his own family. His brother questioned why Melly kept buying expensive jewelry when he couldn't even wear it in jail. "Lawyers are the best thing you can spend money on," he said, pointing out that while Melly has paid for good attorneys, a lot of money went into things that had nothing to do with his defense. But the bigger story here isn't about jewelry, it's about why YNW Bortlen decided to flip. Most people don't realize it started after Melly's retrial was pushed back yet again. The Court of Appeals granted a delay, moving the trial to January 2027. That extra time gave prosecutors space to work out a plea deal with Bortlen. To strengthen their case, a no communication order was filed, cutting off all contact between Melly and Bortlen. Originally, the state wanted to try both men together, something that would have allowed them to use each other's testimony against one another. Since that wasn't possible, the next best thing was flipping Bortlen. And the deal made sense for him. Not only did it reduce his time behind bars, but Melly himself had tried to pin the murders on Bortlen in the first trial. That betrayal pushed Bortlen to switch sides. In court, prosecutors laid out their claims. Bortlen showed up at the hospital driving a car riddled with bullets, 2 bodies inside. He had changed clothes, had residue on his hands suggesting he fired a gun, and repeatedly lied about what happened. Investigators confirmed trace particles of gunpowder were found on him, further fueling suspicion. After that trial, Bortlen hinted at taking a deal by tweeting, "Mind games don't work on people like me," alongside a handshake emoji. But things escalated when he was later hit with witness tampering charges. Prosecutors accused him of trying to influence someone who had been summoned to testify in Melly's case. The timing matched perfectly. The alleged tampering happened between April and July 2023, right as Melly's first trial ended in a mistrial. When investigators searched Bortlen's home, they uncovered disturbing evidence: a notebook where he sketched out jurors' seating positions and described their appearances. To prosecutors, it looked like a plan to interfere with the jury. Commentators like DJ Academics mocked how careless it was, comparing it to keeping a surveillance tape of your own crime in your DVD player. With the plea deal signed, prosecutors believe Bortlen can now shed light on another mystery: why fellow rapper Fredo Bang picked up Melly on the night of the murders. Phone records show Melly dropped his location to Fredo around 4:42 a.m., then sent another pin about 10 minutes later. Investigators want to know, was Fredo just giving him a ride, or was he helping clean up after the crime? Prosecutors are also working to tie Melly's case to gang activity, which would increase the severity of his charges. They've pointed to photos of him throwing up gang signs, affiliating with known figures like Young Thug, and using coded language online. For Melly, the delays, accusations, and new evidence make his legal fight even harder. His lawyers are battling to block some of this material from being used, but prosecutors are determined to paint a picture of Melly not just as a rapper caught in a tragedy, but as someone tied to organized street violence. For the first time, YNW Melly openly went against his own lawyers in court. During today's hearing, he was seen shouting at his attorneys, insisting, "I don't care, I'm not in no gang." They can't prove that. His lawyers, clearly frustrated, told the judge, "Against our advice, our client wants to proceed." 2023, and now, for her release, she must agree to show up in the next trial. Mariah addressed the situation online, writing on Facebook, "Thank you to my village. I love y'all so much. God's plan, not mine." Prosecutors argue this proves she was pressured into silence, and they've hit Melly with 6 new charges, including witness tampering, directing criminal activity, solicitation, and unlawful use of a communication device. Several of those charges alone could put him behind bars for life, even if he's found not guilty in the murder retrial. Juvi's father also spoke out, saying the way Melly allegedly tried to stop witnesses from testifying was shocking. He explained that Melly wasn't even allowed to use the phone, so he relied on passing notes, which others would use to make calls on his behalf. Meanwhile, Melly's mother says her son has been mistreated in jail. She claims he hasn't been allowed to use the phone, receive his mail, or even write letters, privileges that even convicted inmates normally have. She believes the jail is cutting him off from the outside world to prevent further tampering accusations. "It's heartbreaking," she said. "As a mother, I feel helpless." Not everyone is sympathetic, though. Charleston White mocked Melly's complaints, saying, "When you take a life, you don't get to complain about being mistreated in jail." But others, like rapper Boosie, showed compassion toward Melly's mother, calling her a good woman who reminded him of what his own mom went through during his darkest times. Still, the evidence stacking against Melly is hard to ignore. Just hours after the murders, Bortlen and Melly were seen on video dancing and acting carefree. And surveillance footage from only 30 minutes before the shooting captured Melly sitting in the back left seat of the Jeep, the same spot where prosecutors believe the shots came from. With his retrial delayed until 2027, new charges piling up, and Bortlen now cooperating with prosecutors, Melly's fight for freedom has never looked more uncertain. During the hearing, the prosecution presented more evidence that puts YNW Melly in a difficult position. Security camera footage placed him in the back left seat of the Jeep, the exact spot investigators believe the shots came from. According to the case documents, the bullets traveled from left to right, which supports the theory that the shooter was seated where Melly was. Even Juvi's mother confirmed in court that she recognized her son in the footage, sitting on the right side of the back seat, and identified Melly in the rear driver's side seat. In court, Leon Phillips, Juvi's mother, testified for the jury. She was asked to state her name and relationship to the victim, Christopher Thomas, before confirming what she saw. She clearly identified who got into which seat of the Jeep that night, placing her son on the back right and Melly on the back left. But the most damaging piece of evidence isn't just the footage, it's Bortlen's interrogation. Bortlen, who was in the car that night, originally supported Melly's story. Now, investigators believe he's about to reveal the truth and admit that both he and Melly were lying. During questioning, Bortlen claimed he was simply driving back from a studio session in Fort Lauderdale. He said he took I-75 south when, out of nowhere, shots rang out. He described ducking down and almost crashing the car in panic. But detectives quickly began poking holes in his version of events. Police had already combed through the area he described as the drive-by location. They found nothing, no shell casings, no shattered glass, no physical evidence at all. As one detective bluntly put it, "Nothing about what you're saying adds up." Officers pressed him further. How could shell casings just disappear? Why wasn't there any broken glass where he said the windows had been shot out? Why was there no trace of a gunfight at the spot he named? Bortlen could offer no explanation. The more questions they asked, the more agitated Bortlen became. At one point, he snapped, saying he didn't want to talk about it anymore because he'd already told the story. But detectives reminded him that his 2 friends who died that night deserved the truth, and that the more details he gave about his and Melly's lifestyles, the closer they could get to solving what really happened. Their message was clear. The evidence didn't match his story. The physical trail, or lack of it, suggested something very different happened inside that Jeep than what Bortlen described. With his testimony under scrutiny and new facts surfacing, prosecutors believe Bortlen may ultimately become the key witness who exposes the full truth about that night and Melly's role in it.